baby, I'm so sorry I'm calling this late." Wes's voice came through the car speakers, slightly breathless, coasting on that easy practice charm he used on difficult clients. "I'm still at the office. This deadline is absolutely killing me, so I'm just going to crash here on the couch tonight, okay?" Behind his voice, there was no hum of a late-night central AC system, no rhythmic clacking of a mechanical keyboard, or the distant murmur of other overworked associates. Instead, there was a sound, a sharp, rhythmic friction of fabric against fabric, and then a moan. It was a low, guttural sound followed by a woman's voice, thick, with a jagged kind of heat. "Forget about her," she whispered, the words cutting through the static of the line like a razor. "Just keep going." My fingers tightened around the steering wheel of my 2019 Honda Civic until the joints in my hands throbbed with a dull ache. The cold from the leather seeped into my palms, matching the chill spreading from my chest. Under the hood, the engine emitted a series of metallic ticks as it cooled in the humid Texas night. The scent of a cheap, vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror suddenly felt cloying, sticking to the back of my throat until I had to swallow hard to keep from gagging. I am 29 years old. I spend my 12-hour shifts as a neonatal intensive care nurse at Cook Children's, which means my entire professional existence is built on maintaining a flat line of composure while everything around me is screaming. When a premature infant stops breathing, I don't gasp. I don't cry. I check the monitor, I calculate the dosage, and I move. Right now, I was counting the ragged breaths of my husband through a digital connection. "So yeah, it is going to be a late one," Wes continued, his tone shifting back to that perfect domestic frequency. "Do not wait up for me." I looked through the windshield. The parking lot of the Ridgeclea Village apartments was bathed in a sickly, jaundiced yellow from the streetlights. Directly in front of me on the second floor, the windows of Unit 214 were glowing. My phone sat in the cup holder, the Find My iPhone app still open. The little green dot representing Wes was pulsing right there inside that glowing apartment. Not his office downtown. Not on a couch surrounded by spreadsheets. "She is right," I said. My voice was level. Precise. It was the same tone I used when delivering a critical vitals report to a surgical resident. What Wes's voice faltered. The background noise vanished, instantly replaced by a heavy, panicked silence. "She said you should forget about me. She is right. Do not worry about me, Wes. I am not home either." I didn't wait for the stuttering excuse I knew was coming. I tapped the red icon on the screen and blocked his number before he could even draw another breath. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. My hands were perfectly still. The fact that my heart wasn't racing was more terrifying than the sounds I'd just heard. I had known. I'd known for 3 months. I'd smelled the perfume that didn't belong to me. I'd watched him move our 3rd round of IVF treatments further and further down the calendar, citing vague financial pressures that never quite made sense. I had known, and I had chosen to believe his lies because the lie felt like a warm blanket and the truth felt like being thrown into an ice bath. A small red light caught my eye. My phone's voice memo app was still running. I'd started a recording earlier to dictate some nursing notes about a patient's oxygen levels, and I'd never hit stop. The little digital wave was still moving, capturing the silence of the car and the echo of my own voice. It had recorded everything, every moan, every lie. I shifted the car into reverse and backed out of the space. I didn't head toward our house in the suburbs. I drove toward the Waffle House on Camp Bowie, the only place that felt honest at 2 a.m. The smell of old grease and burnt coffee hit me as I sat in a corner booth, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing with a low, irritating hum. I opened the Notes app. I began a timeline. I didn't do it because I knew what my next move was. I did it because documenting a crisis was the only way I knew how to survive one. By the time I pulled into our driveway at 5 a.m, the sky was a bruised purple. The house was dark. Wes's truck was still gone. I went straight to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. For the first time in 4 years of marriage, I didn't ask for permission to look at the accounts. I typed in his password, the same one he used for everything, because he was too arrogant to think I'd ever look. The first layer of the rot was easy to find. Our joint checking account showed regular withdrawals of $400 to $600 every single week, neatly categorized as business entertainment. It had been happening for 8 months. The second layer was worse. I pulled up the credit card statements and saw the charges at Nordstrom and a high-end boutique in Dallas. $895 for a single pair of shoes. Wes had told me that was a gift for a client after the Hernandez closing. Then I found the email in his trash folder. It was an alert from 3 months ago. A new account had been opened using my Social Security number. I went to the credit reporting site, my breath hitching as the data loaded. There it was, a $15,000 line of credit I had never applied for. The billing address wasn't our home. It was Unit 214 at the Ridgeglia Village Apartments. I didn't cry. Nurses don't cry when the patient is still on the table. I started taking screenshots. Every withdrawal, every forged signature on those digital applications. My fingers flew across the trackpad with the same clinical efficiency I used to adjust a ventilator. He hadn't just betrayed our bed. He was using my identity, my credit, and my hard-earned salary to fund the very roof he was sleeping under with another woman. I heard the garage door groan open at noon. I heard his heavy footsteps, then the sound of the shower running for 20 minutes as he tried to wash the scent of her off his skin. When he finally walked into the kitchen, I was standing at the stove. I'd made grilled cheese and tomato soup. The laptop was closed and hidden. My hair was pulled back in its usual low ponytail. I put on the mask of the good wife. "Baby, I am so sorry about last night," Wes said, walking up behind me. He smelled like soap and Tom Ford cologne. He sounded so tired, so convincing. "The Mitchell deal is just falling apart." "You look exhausted," I said, keeping my back to him as I flipped a sandwich. "Yeah, the office couch is not exactly a Tempur-Pedic," he chuckled, reaching for a glass of water. "There is soup on the stove," I told him. I gripped the handle of the spatula so hard the plastic bit into my palm. I focused on that small, sharp pain. I chose the silence. I could have turned around and screamed. I could have thrown the hot soup in his face and showed him the screenshots. But I knew if I did that now, he'd have time to move the money. He'd call his mother, and they would start spinning a narrative before I could even get to a lawyer. I needed to be the waita, the nurse, for a few more weeks. I needed to watch the vitals. I needed to gather the evidence. 2 days later, I was at my kickboxing class, the rhythmic thud of my gloves against the heavy bag echoing through the gym. I wasn't just training. I was venting. Holly, a paralegal I'd met at the gym months ago, watched me from the next bag over. She had been through a divorce 3 years ago, and she had that sharp, unsentimental look in her eyes that only comes from surviving a house fire. After class, as we sat on the bench wiping the sweat from our faces, I told her everything. She didn't look shocked. She just leaned in her voice, dropping to a low, urgent whisper. "Do not confront him yet, Mackenzie. Every day you stay quiet is another day of documentation. Texas is a community property state. If he is spending your money on her, that is dissipation of assets. You need a forensic accountant to trace every cent before he realizes you are on to him." He opened a credit line in my name, Holly. My name. Her eyes narrowed. "That is not just a divorce issue. That is fraud. You are sitting on a nuclear option and you are the only one with the code." I drove home as the sun began to dip below the horizon, the Texas sky turning the color of a fresh bruise. I thought about turning the car around. I thought about the ghost of my mother's voice telling me that all men wander and that I should just be grateful he provided for me. But then I looked at my own hands. I saw the faint purple mark from the last time I'd had blood drawn for an IVF cycle we couldn't afford because he was busy buying red-soled shoes for a mistress. I didn't turn around. I drove home, sat across from him at dinner, and asked him how his day was. I would find out exactly how much he had stolen. And then I would make sure he paid for every single cent. The mahogany desk in the corner office of Baker & Cole smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive perfume. I sat on the edge of the leather chair, my back straight, my hands folded tightly in my lap to keep from picking at the dry skin around my cuticles. Across from me, Holly's boss adjusted his glasses. He didn't look like the shark I'd expected. He looked like a grandfather who spent his weekends fly fishing. But when he opened the folder containing my screenshots, his expression turned as clinical as a surgeon's. He flipped through the bank statements, his eyes scanning the regular withdrawals of $400. Then he reached the credit report. He lingered on the $15,000 line of credit, opened in my name with the billing address for Unit 214. He didn't gasp. He didn't offer me a tissue. He just tapped a silver pen against the desk, the rhythmic clicking sounding like a countdown. "Texas is a community property state, Mackenzie," he said, his voice low and steady. "Normally, we would just split the pot down the middle. But your husband has been very busy. This is what we call dissipation of assets. He is using marital funds to maintain a separate household and purchase luxury items for someone who is not his wife." "And the credit line?" I asked. My voice felt thin like a wire stretched to its breaking point. "That is fraud," he replied, looking me dead in the eye. "Plain and simple. We could file today and have a process server at his office by 5 o'clock. But if we do that, we lose the element of surprise. He will start moving money. He will close accounts. He will hide the trail." He leaned back the leather chair, groaning under his weight. "You need to go home. You need to unblock his number and tell him you are sorry for overreacting. You need to make him think he has successfully managed you. We need 5 weeks, Mackenzie. 5 weeks of you playing the role of the devoted wife while we map every cent he has drained from your future." I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach, sharp and acidic. The thought of sleeping in that house, of letting him touch my shoulder or call me babe while I knew what sat in Unit 214, made my throat tighten. I thought of the 47 minutes I'd spent keeping a coding infant alive last week, my hands steady even as the monitors wailed. This was just another shift. "I can do it," I said, my voice hardening. I took my phone out and unblocked his number. I typed the message with steady thumbs. "I am so sorry about the other night. I overreacted and I have been so stressed with work. Come home tonight, I'm making that pot roast you love." I hit send and turned the phone face down. I didn't wait for the reply. I knew exactly what it would say. The next 21 days were a blur of fluorescent lights, sterile gloves, and the quiet, simmering rage I kept locked behind my teeth. My life became a series of covert operations. Every time Wes stepped into the shower, I was at his nightstand. I learned to breathe in sync with the sound of the running water. 3 minutes to unlock his phone. 4 minutes to scroll through the iMessage threads he thought he'd scrubbed. He was using a hidden app for the daily chatter, but he was lazy. He'd left a trail of photos in a shared cloud folder. Vanessa at brunch, Vanessa in a new silk robe, Vanessa laughing in front of a Christmas tree that my paycheck had likely paid for. I took screenshots of everything. 14 messages from a contact labeled only as V. I sent them to a private email address I'd created at the library, then deleted the sent items and cleared the browser history. My heart would thud against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands stayed as still as a stone. During my lunch breaks at the hospital, I sat in the cafeteria with Holly. We didn't talk about our weekends. We talked about the spreadsheet. She'd helped me create a document hidden inside a folder labeled Kickboxing Schedule. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. $47,000. That was the running total. 8 months of steak dinners at Del Frisco's. 3 weekend trips to Austin that he'd told me were for regional sales meetings. A necklace from Tiffany & Company. And the shoes. Always the red-soled shoes. "He's not even being careful anymore," Holly whispered, stabbing a piece of lettuce with her plastic fork. "He thinks you're back in his pocket. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. He thinks I'm the girl from Lubbock who's just lucky to be here," I replied, staring at the total on the screen. 47,000. That was nearly a year of my salary. That was the house we were supposed to buy. That was the family we were supposed to start. By the 3rd week, I found her, Vanessa Rowe. It wasn't hard. Wes had checked into a restaurant on Facebook and tagged the agency she worked for. Her Instagram was public, a curated gallery of a life I was subsidizing. I spent my nights after Wes fell asleep scrolling through her feed. I saw the red shoes in a post from 6 weeks ago. Date night vibes, she'd captioned it, followed by a lipstick emoji. I looked at the curve of her legs, the perfect blonde highlights, and then I looked at my own hands, cracked and dry from the hospital's industrial soap. I didn't feel jealous. I felt an icy, crystalline resolve. Every night, Wes would crawl into bed and pull me against him. It was a habit, a muscle memory from a marriage that no longer existed. He would tuck his face into the crook of my neck and murmur that he loved me. I would lie there, eyes wide open in the dark, counting his breaths. 1, 2, 3. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was an investigator, waiting for the vitals to flatline. On a Saturday afternoon in the 4th week, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop on West 7th Street. The air conditioning was struggling against the 90-degree Texas heat, and the air smelled of roasted beans and burnt sugar. I sat by the window, a cup of cold brew sweating on the table in front of me, watching the entrance to the Ridgeclea Village building across the street. I told myself I was just looking for visual confirmation. But as I watched the glass doors swing open, I knew I was looking for the person who had helped him burn my life down. Vanessa stepped out onto the sidewalk. She looked exactly like her photos, only sharper, thinner. And there they were, the red shoes. They flashed in the sunlight with every step she took toward the nail salon on the corner. $895 on a joint credit card, a client gift for the Hernandez closing. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. I followed her, keeping a block of distance between us. I watched her enter the salon and take a seat in a padded chair. Through the glass, I saw her pick up her phone. She was smiling, her eyes bright. I didn't need to be close to know who she was texting. I could practically hear the ding of his phone in my mind. I walked back to my car, my legs feeling like lead. I sat in the driver's seat and called Holly. My voice was so calm it sounded like it belonged to someone else. I have everything I said. The spreadsheet is done. I have the photos of her wearing the shoes. I have the credit fraud document. I want to file on Monday. Are you sure? Mac Holly asked. I could hear the excitement in her voice, but underneath it, there was a note of caution. Once we hit that button, there is no going back. I hit the button 3 weeks ago, I said, looking at a photo on my phone. It was from our 3rd anniversary. Wes was holding me, his chin resting on my head. He'd bought me a $60 pair of sneakers from Target that year, telling me we needed to save every penny for the next round of IVF. I had cried tears of gratitude. I had told him he was the most selfless man I'd ever known. A single tear tracked down my cheek, landing on the screen. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. I wasn't crying for him. I was crying for the girl in that photo who had been so easy to fool. I deleted the picture. I drove home, the late afternoon sun blinding as it bounced off the hoods of the cars on the interstate. My phone chimed with a text. Babe, working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where he was going, and I knew exactly what he was going to find when he finally tried to come home. I pulled into our driveway, parked the car, and walked inside. I didn't start dinner. I went to the guest room, pulled a suitcase from under the bed, and began to pack. The 5 weeks were almost up. The documentation was finished. Now it was time for the surgery. I stood in the center of our bedroom looking at the king-sized bed where I'd spent 4 years building a future out of smoke and mirrors. I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of the person I'd become to keep him happy. I snapped the suitcase shut. Monday morning was less than 48 hours away. I just had to survive the weekend. I just had to keep the mask on for 2 more nights. I walked back into the kitchen, turned on the light, and waited for the sound of his truck in the driveway. I should have paid attention to the feeling in my gut, the one that told me the timeline was about to shatter. I didn't. I thought I was the one holding the scalpel. I didn't realize that the door was about to be kicked open before I was ready. The fluorescent light in the hallway above Unit 214 flickered with a rhythmic, irritating buzz that set my teeth on edge. I stood there for a heartbeat, my hand hovering over the keypad of the door I used to call home. 9, 4, 7, 5. I pressed the digits with a steady finger, waiting for the familiar mechanical click of the deadbolt. Instead, a harsh, triple red flash blinked back at me. I stared at the keypad. I tried again, slower this time, pressing each button until it beeped. Red, red, red. The realization didn't hit me like a wave. It settled over me like a layer of fine, suffocating ash. Wes hadn't just changed the locks on our life. He'd changed the 4-digit code that stood between me and my bed, my clothes, and the 47 pages of documentation sitting on the kitchen island. I turned away from the door and walked toward the stairs. My footsteps echoed against the concrete, sounding hollow and lonely. I climbed into my car, the interior still smelling faintly of the lavender detergent I'd used on the sheets that morning. I drove toward Holly's apartment, my vision tunneling on the red taillights of the car in front of me. Holly's living room smelled like stale popcorn and the generic fabric softener she used to save money. I sat on the edge of her oversized, sunken corduroy couch, listening to the muffled sound of a sitcom, laughing through the thin apartment walls. Overhead, the kitchen light flickered once, twice, before the bulb finally gave up and plunged the room into a dim amber shadow. I opened my phone. The blue light felt like it was searing my retinas. I went to Instagram, my thumb hovering over the search bar. I didn't even have to type her full name before the algorithm suggested it. Vanessa's story was gone, deleted within 30 minutes of being posted, but the internet has a long memory in a city like Fort Worth. I found the screenshots in a local Facebook group called Fort Worth Tea. Over 2,400 members were currently dissecting my life. The comments scrolled by in a blur of judgment. One woman wondered if the wife had driven him away with her long shifts at the hospital. Another suggested that both women probably needed to find some self-respect. I wasn't Mackenzie Reeves, the nurse who stayed up 47 minutes to save a baby's life anymore. I was a character in a digital soap opera, a woman fighting over a man who had forged her name on a credit application. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Vanessa is lying, the message read. I could practically hear Wes's voice, the frantic, defensive edge he got when a deal was slipping through his fingers. She photoshopped everything, Mac. She is obsessed. Come home and we will talk like adults. Then came the message from Renee. Mackenzie Wes showed me the proof that this girl is unstable. Please come home. Do not listen to Holly. She is just projecting her own bitter history onto your marriage. I leaned my head back against the couch and looked at the ceiling. I opened the gallery on my phone and scrolled back to our wedding day. There we were, standing under the oak trees in Lubbock. Wes was wearing a navy suit that fit him perfectly. I was wearing a $400 dress from a clearance rack at David's Bridal because he'd convinced me we needed to put every extra penny into a high-yield savings account for our future. I looked at the girl in the white dress. She was smiling so hard her cheeks must have ached. She looked so safe. She looked like she believed every word the man in the navy suit was saying. I felt a sudden sharp pang of grief, but it wasn't for Wes. It was for her. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a choice that was just for me. I'd moved for him. I'd switched hospitals for him. I'd delayed the family I wanted because he told me the timing wasn't right. He hadn't just absorbed $47,000. He had stolen 4 years of my life piece by piece until I was nothing but a support system for his ego. I tapped the photo. I selected delete. I opened my notes app. I found the entry titled Timeline of Wes's Affair, and I hit the trash icon. I created a new note. I titled it Things I Want. I sat there for 10 minutes, the only sound in the room being the low hum of the refrigerator. I typed one word, Houston. The next morning, the sun rose over Fort Worth in a hazy, humid gold. I woke up on Holly's couch with an ache in my neck and a strange, quiet clarity in my chest. I called my attorney at 8 o'clock, sharp. "File it," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "Everything. The divorce petition, the emergency motion for support, the dissipation claim, and call the credit card company. I want to report the identity theft officially. We can have him served by lunch," he replied. I thanked him and hung up. I took a shower in Holly's cramped bathroom, using a bar of soap that smelled like industrial lemons. I put on a pair of clean scrubs Holly had borrowed from a friend. I had a 12-hour shift at the NICU. The babies didn't care about my bank account or the locks on my front door. They needed me to be precise. On the drive to Cook Children's, I didn't call the bank or the lawyer. I dialed a number I'd saved in my contacts 3 years ago and never touched. "Houston Methodist Human Resources, this is Sarah speaking." "Hi," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "This is Mackenzie Reeves. I applied for a NICU position 3 years ago and had to withdraw my application. I was calling to see if you had any current openings for an experienced neonatal nurse." There was a pause, the sound of typing on the other end. "Actually, we have 2 positions that just opened up this morning. Can you come in for an interview later this week?" I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. "I can be there on Thursday." By Wednesday morning, Wes had been served. I'd ignored 47 calls and over 100 text messages from him and Renee. I spent my time in the hospital focusing on the tiny, fragile lives in the plastic incubators. In the NICU, everything is documented. Every milligram of caffeine, every breath, every fluctuation in temperature. It is a world of absolute accountability. When the settlement conference was called for Friday morning, I arrived straight from my night shift. I didn't go home to change. I didn't put on a suit to impress his lawyer. I walked into the mahogany-paneled conference room at Baker & Cole, wearing my blue scrubs and a pair of sensible work shoes. Wes was already there, sitting next to a man in a $1,000 suit. Renee sat in the chair behind him, her face a mask of disappointment. Wes looked like he hadn't slept, his hair slightly disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. When I walked in, he started to stand up, his mouth opening to say my name. I didn't look at him. I sat down next to my attorney and pulled a thick manila folder from my bag. "My client is willing to be reasonable." Wes's attorney began, his voice smooth and condescending. "We understand there have been some indiscretions, but Wes is prepared to offer an equitable split of the joint savings to avoid a messy trial." My attorney didn't even look up from his notepad. "We are not here for equitable, Mike. We are here for Exhibit A." He slid a document across the table. It was the credit line statement. $15,000. Opened 8 months ago. My Social Security number was typed clearly at the top. The billing address was Unit 214 at the Ridgeglia Village Apartments. Wes's lawyer leaned in, squinting at the paper. Wes's jaw tightened, a small muscle jumping in his cheek. And Exhibit B, my attorney, continued placing a printed copy of my spreadsheet on the table. $47,000 in dissipated assets. We have mapped every steak dinner, every hotel room, and every gift. He tapped a highlighted line on the 3rd page, including the $895 charge for a pair of red-soled shoes on October 14th. Your client noted it as a gift for the Hernandez closing. However, we have a time-stamped photo from social media showing a Miss Vanessa Rowe wearing those exact shoes 5 days later with the caption, "Date night." Wes didn't look at his lawyer. He looked at me. The charm was gone. The overconfidence had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked suddenly small in his expensive suit. "I think we need a recess," Wes's attorney said, his voice no longer smooth. I stood up and walked out into the hallway. I needed air. I needed to be away from the smell of his cologne and the weight of Renee's stare. I walked toward the break room, but I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. "Mac, wait." Wes caught up to me near the elevators. He didn't have his lawyer with him. He looked desperate. "You planned this. For weeks you sat across from me and smiled. You let me think we were okay while you were building a case like a federal prosecutor." "I learned from the best, Wes," I said, my voice as flat as a heart rate monitor. You spent 4 years convincing me we were a team while you were forging my name on debt applications. I just started keeping a better chart. I was going to end it with her, he said, stepping closer, reaching for my arm. I swear, I just needed time to figure out how to untangle the finances. I stepped back, putting 3 feet of cold Texas air between us. You had 4 years of my time. You don't get another second. Please, he whispered. Don't do this. We can go to counseling. I will pay it all back. Just tell your lawyer to pull the fraud report. I looked down at the phone in my hand. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it so tightly. The screen was dark, but the small red light at the top was pulsing. I'd hit the record button the moment I heard his footsteps. It was a reflex now. Document the crisis. I am a NICU nurse, Wes, I told him. I don't leave things to chance. I document the truth so I know exactly when the patient is beyond saving. The elevator dinged at the end of the hall. The doors slid open, and Renee stepped out. She'd been waiting in the lobby, but she couldn't stay away. She looked from Wes to me, her eyes searching for the lie she so desperately wanted to believe. Mackenzie, she said, her voice trembling, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you aren't doing this over a few mistakes. I looked at the woman who had spent 40 years making excuses for the men in her life. I didn't feel like hurting her. I just felt finished. He used my social security number to lease an apartment for another woman, Renee. I have the forged documents in that room. I am not asking you to believe me. I am telling you what is about to become public record. Renee turned to her son. She didn't ask him if I was lying. She just looked at his face, at the way he couldn't meet her eyes. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. 2 weeks later, I sat in the driver's seat of my Honda Civic. The trunk was packed with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box filled with my nursing books. My kickboxing gear was shoved into the back seat. On the passenger seat sat a folder from Houston Methodist. The offer letter was on top. Start date April 1st. I rolled down the windows, letting the warm Texas wind blow through my hair. I'd stopped wearing it in a ponytail. I'd stopped wearing the wedding ring on a chain around my neck. I'd sold it yesterday for $1,200. It was enough for the security deposit on a small place near the medical center in Houston. I pulled out onto the interstate, the Fort Worth skyline, shrinking in my rearview mirror. I felt a vibration in the center console. A text from Holly. You left your stainless steel water bottle at my place. Want me to ship it to the new address? I smiled and typed back. Keep it. I am buying a new one when I get to town. New city, new life. I put the phone down and looked at the road ahead. 5 hours of pavement and open sky. I didn't have to cook dinner for anyone. I didn't have to check a Find My iPhone app. I didn't have to wonder if the person sleeping next to me was a stranger. I was just Mackenzie, and for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. Would you like me to write a summary of the settlement details or a bonus scene about her first day in Houston? The air inside the conference room was stagnant, smelling of burnt coffee and the faint chemical tang of lemon floor cleaner. I sat on the edge of the leather chair, my scrubs crinkling with every small movement. My shoulders ached from a 12-hour shift in the NICU, but my spine was a steel rod. Across the oval table, Wes looked like a different man. The polished corporate armor he usually wore was tarnished. His dress shirt was wrinkled at the elbows, and his tie was pulled loose as if he were suffocating. Beside him, his attorney cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. My client is willing to consider a generous, equitable split of the joint assets, the man said, clicking a heavy gold pen. He acknowledges that the marriage has reached a point of no return, and we would like to avoid the unpleasantness of a protracted court battle. Wes leaned forward, his eyes searching mine, trying to find the woman who used to apologize for being 10 minutes late with dinner. Mac, come on, he whispered. We can just finish this. Right here. No more lawyers, no more drama. My attorney didn't smile. He didn't even look at Wes. He simply reached into a thick manila folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished wood. We will get to the division of property in a moment, Mike, my lawyer said. But first we need to address Exhibit A. It was a credit line statement. $15,000. The date at the top was from 8 months ago. My social security number was typed in black ink, clear and undeniable. But it was the billing address that made the air leave the room. Unit 2, 114, Ridglia Village Apartments. Wes's hand moved toward the paper, his fingers trembling slightly before he pulled them back. His jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle leaping in his cheek. The signature on this digital application is a forgery, my attorney continued, his voice as dry as parchment. My client never authorized this line of credit. And then there is Exhibit B. A thick stack of paper hit the table with a heavy thud. It was the spreadsheet I had spent 5 weeks building. Every dinner at Del Frisco's, every weekend getaway to Austin, every jewelry purchase. My lawyer flipped to the third page, tapping a highlighted line. Mr. Dunlap, can you explain this $895 charge at Nordstrom from October 14th? My lawyer asked. Your personal notes in the joint ledger claim this was a client gift for the Hernandez closing. Is that correct? Wes didn't look at his lawyer. He stared at the table, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Yes, he muttered. A gift. My lawyer pulled his phone from his pocket and laid it face up on the table. He swiped to a screenshot from Instagram. It was Vanessa Rowe, her blonde hair catching the light as she laughed in a crowded bar. She was crossing her legs, and on her feet were the red-soled heels. The caption was, Date Night Vibes, followed by a lipstick emoji. The date on the post was October 19th, 5 days after the purchase. The silence that followed was absolute. Wes's attorney leaned in, whispering something frantic in his ear, but Wes didn't respond. He looked at the photo, then at me. For the first time in 4 years, I didn't see the man who had promised to protect me. I saw a small, panicked stranger who had built a life out of stolen pieces of mine. We have 47 exhibits just like this one, my lawyer said, his voice cutting through the tension. We can go through them one by one in front of a judge, or we can discuss the terms of a disproportionate split based on the dissipation of marital funds and identity fraud. We would like a recess, Wes's attorney said, his voice cracking. I stood up without a word and walked out of the room. I needed to breathe air that didn't feel like it had been through someone else's lungs. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the elevators, but the sound of heavy footsteps followed me. Mac, wait, Wes called out. He caught up to me just as the elevator dinged. He was alone, his lawyer nowhere in sight. He looked raw, stripped of the charm he used to navigate the world. You planned this. For weeks you sat across from me and smiled. You cooked me dinner. You slept next to me. And the whole time you were building a case like a federal prosecutor. I learned from the best, Wes, I said. My voice was the flat, clinical tone I used when a baby's vitals began to slip. You spent 8 months convincing me we were a team, while you were forging my name on debt applications to fund your apartment. I just started keeping a better chart. I was going to end it, he said, stepping closer, reaching for my arm. With Vanessa. I swear, I just needed time to untangle everything. I stepped back, putting a yard of cold hallway between us. You had 4 years of my time. You don't get another second. Please, he whispered, his eyes filling with a desperate, manipulative heat. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll pay it all back. Just don't report the fraud. I looked at the phone in my hand. I hadn't even realized I was holding it. The screen was dark, but the small red light at the top was pulsing. I'd hit the record button the moment I heard his footsteps. It wasn't a choice. It was a reflex. It was the survival instinct of a woman who had spent 5 weeks documenting the death of her marriage. You recorded this, he asked, his eyes dropping to the phone. I record everything, Wes, I told him. I am a NICU nurse. Documentation is the only thing that keeps the truth from being buried. The elevator doors slid open. Renee stepped out, her face pale, her eyes darting between us. Wes had called her to the office for support, a final attempt to use his mother as a shield. She looked at me, her mouth trembling, her hands clutching her designer purse. Mackenzie, she said, her voice small. Tell me this is just a misunderstanding. Wes said you were having a breakdown. He said you were being influenced by that girl Holly. I looked at Renee, and for a second I felt a flash of pity. She had spent a lifetime believing the best of a man who didn't exist. I reached into my folder and handed her a copy of the credit statement with the forged signature. Your son opened a $15,000 line of credit in my name to pay for an apartment for another woman, Renee, I said. I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm telling you what is about to be read in open court. You should hear it from me before you read it in the papers. Renee looked at the paper, then at her son. Wes didn't say a word. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to gaslight her. He just looked at the floor. The silence from Renee was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a mother finally seeing the man she had raised. 2:20 later, I stood in the driveway of our house for the last time. My Honda Civic was packed to the roof. I had 2 suitcases, a box of nursing textbooks, and my kickboxing gear. The trunk was heavy, the suspension sitting low. On the passenger seat sat a manila folder from Houston Methodist. The offer letter for the neonatal nursing position was on top, signed and dated. The morning air was thick and humid, smelling of damp earth and the gasoline from a neighbor's lawnmower. I rolled down the windows, letting the Texas wind blow through the car. I wasn't wearing my hair in a ponytail today. It was down, whipping around my face. I reached into the center console and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the wedding ring. I'd sold the diamond yesterday for $1,200. It was exactly what I needed for the security deposit on a small apartment near the medical center in Houston. I pulled out of the driveway and headed toward the interstate. The Fort Worth skyline grew smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror until it was nothing but a jagged line against the horizon. I felt a vibration against my thigh. A text from Holly. You left your stainless steel water bottle at my place, it read. Want me to ship it to the new address? I smiled and typed back with one hand while keeping my eyes on the road. Keep it, I wrote. I am buying a new one when I get to town. New city, new life. Look at me go. I put the phone down and looked at the long stretch of I-20 West. 5 hours of open road lay between me and the life I was supposed to have started 3 years ago. I didn't have a husband. I didn't have a joint account. I didn't have the safety of the familiar. But as I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, I realized I had something much better. I had myself. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. I reached for the radio and turned it up, drowning out the sound of the wind. I didn't look back. I just drove. Would you like me to write a short follow-up on her first day at the new hospital? The humidity of the Gulf Coast pressed against the windshield as I crossed the city limits, a thick, heavy blanket that felt more like a hug than a burden. Fort Worth was 5 hours behind me, shrinking into a collection of jagged memories and forged signatures. The radio was playing something low and melodic, a station that didn't care about top 40 hits or corporate branding. I reached over and turned it up, letting the sound fill the empty cabin of my car. I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner just outside of Huntsville to stretch my legs. The air smelled of damp pine needles and diesel exhaust. Inside, the linoleum was cracked, and the air conditioning hummed with a tired, rhythmic rattling. I sat at the counter and ordered a slice of peach pie, watching the waitress move with a slow, practiced grace. She didn't know my name. She didn't know about the $15,000 credit line or the red shoes. To her, I was just a woman in blue scrubs heading somewhere new. I looked at my reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. My eyes didn't look tired anymore. They looked clear. For years, I had believed that safety was a person, a house, a joint bank account with a growing balance. I had stayed in a cold bed because I was terrified of the silence that came with leaving. I had apologized for things I didn't do just to keep the floor from shaking beneath my feet. I realized then that the most dangerous lie Wes ever told wasn't about Vanessa. It was the lie he told me about myself, that I couldn't survive without his shadow to hide in. He had counted on my fear of the unknown to keep me compliant. He had bet everything on the idea that I would choose a familiar cage over an unfamiliar sky. As I paid the check, I left a $20 tip. It felt good to spend my own money without calculating how it fit into someone else's vision of a future that didn't include me. I climbed back into the Civic and felt the weight of the manila folder on the seat beside me. It wasn't just an offer letter. It was a receipt for my own worth. I thought about the other women I'd seen in the hospital waiting rooms, women with quiet voices and downcast eyes, carrying the same invisible weight I had just dropped on the side of the interstate. They were waiting for a sign, for a moment of permission that was never going to come from anyone but themselves. I thought about the word I had typed in my phone at midnight on Holly's couch. Houston. It wasn't just a city. It was a boundary. It was the place where Mackenzie Reeves stopped being an extension of someone else's ego and started being the architect of her own life. The road ahead was dark, lit only by the steady white lines and the distant glow of the city. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward a version of myself that didn't need to be documented to be real. I took a deep breath, the humid air filling my lungs, and realized that for the first time in a decade, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was the one walking in my own shoes now, and they fit perfectly. I gripped the steering wheel, not to hold on for dear life, but to guide the way. The silence in the car wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibilities. I want to know, for anyone listening to this, have you ever realized that the person you were trying so hard to save was actually the one holding you under? What was the moment you finally decided to choose yourself, even if it meant losing everything else? Drop your story in the comments. I'm listening. Would you like me to write a scene where Mackenzie meets her first patient in Houston and finds a new kind of connection,